Some events are just so huge, so catastrophic, they almost feel unreal. But behind every single one of those headlines, there are deeply personal stories. Today, we're digging into the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103, but we're going to do it through the eyes of one father who just refused to accept the official story. His search for answers would end up challenging the very foundations of the case. And it's a story that really shows you how the hunt for justice can be just as complicated as the crime itself.
Let's start with this number, 270. On December 21st, 1988, this was the total number of lives lost when Pan Am Flight 103 exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland. That's 259 people on the plane and another 11 people on the ground. Just gone in an instant.
And to really feel the human cost behind that number, think about this. A 20-year-old Syracuse student named Karen Lee Hunt was on that flight. She'd bought a small teapot for her mom, as a gift. In a debris field that stretched for hundreds of miles, amid all that chaos and destruction, that little teapot was found completely intact, a fragile symbol of love that somehow survived a fall from 6 miles up in the sky.
So where do you even start when your crime scene covers 845 square miles? Well, from the very beginning, investigators treated this as a criminal act, and what they did became the blueprint for disaster investigation. They managed to recover over 80% of the aircraft, piece by piece, meticulously putting together not just the plane, but the plot itself.
And this is what they found. The weapon was an IED, an improvised explosive device. But let me tell you, this was far from an amateur job. It was hidden inside a Toshiba radio, and the trigger was a highly sophisticated electronic timer. This thing was built for one reason and one reason only, to bring down a jumbo jet. That level of complexity screamed state-sponsored terrorism. Now, according to the prosecution, the bomb's journey began way before it ever got on Pan Am 103. The official story is that it started in Malta, loaded as unaccompanied baggage, which, right there, is a massive security failure. From there, it was transferred through Frankfurt, then London, and finally placed in the forward cargo hold of Flight 103. This whole chain of events just laid bare the fatal flaws in 1980s airport security. All this investigation leads to this really unique trial, held under Scottish law, but in the Netherlands. And the result? One Libyan intelligence officer, a man named Abdelbasset al-Megrahi, was found guilty. But, and this is a huge but, his co-accused, the other guy who was supposedly in on it with him, was acquitted. This is a huge deal because that acquittal blows a massive hole in the prosecution's core theory of a joint intelligence operation. For a lot of people, that verdict was the end of the story. Case closed, justice served. But not for Dr. Jim Swire. His daughter, Flora, was on that flight. And for him, his grief didn't lead to closure. It ignited this tireless public campaign for what he believed was the real truth. For Dr. Swire, the conviction of this one man just felt wrong. As he sat through the trial and examined the evidence, his faith in the official story just completely crumbled. The verdict wasn't an answer for him. It was the start of this deep, nagging doubt that a terrible miscarriage of justice had just taken place. And you can really hear his conviction years later, when Megrahi was eventually released from prison on compassionate grounds. The world was outraged. But Dr. Swire's take was the complete opposite. For him, the real scandal wasn't that a sick man was let go. It was that this man, who he firmly believed was innocent, was ever convicted at all. So why was he so sure? Why did he believe this so strongly? Well, it's because the prosecution's entire massive case against Megrahi was basically built on just two incredibly fragile pillars of evidence. One tiny fragment of a bomb timer and the testimony of a single eyewitness. So let's take a closer look at these two pillars because they start to get really shaky. Okay, first, the physical evidence, Exhibit PT-356. This was supposed to be the smoking gun, but scientific analysis found zero explosive damage on it. In fact, some evidence suggested it was cut by a tool. Then you have the manufacturer, who said he was first shown a totally different prototype. And get this, he even claimed he turned down a $4 million offer from the FBI. And the FBI expert who made that initial euphoric connection, well, he was later discredited for a lack of a scientific background and for, believe it or not, rewriting lab reports. All right, so pillar number 2, the eyewitness. A shopkeeper named Tony Gauchi claimed he sold clothes found in the bomb suitcase to Megrahi. Sounds convincing, right?
Well, his testimony was an absolute mess. He gave wildly different descriptions of the buyer. He was shown a photo of McGrahy before the official police lineup, which is a huge no-no, and then it came out that he and his brother had been paid over £1 million by the US government for their testimony.
And look, these doubts aren't just coming from a grieving father. An official Scottish legal review board found 6 separate grounds on which the conviction may have been a miscarriage of justice. 6! But if that's not enough, listen to this. The very man who designed the legal framework for the trial, Professor Robert Black, called it the most disgraceful miscarriage of justice in Scotland for 100 years. That's the architect of the trial saying it was a sham. So, if the case against Libya was so deeply flawed, it leaves us with a huge, agonizing question. If not them, then who was really responsible? And why on earth would the prosecution build a case on such shaky ground? This is where the story shifts from forensics and crime scenes to the world of geopolitics.
So you've got 2 main theories on the table. The official one, it was Libya, getting payback for a 1986 US airstrike. But the alternate theory, the one Dr. Swire and many others believe, points to Iran. Just 5 months before Lockerbie, a US warship, the USS Vincennes, mistakenly shot down an Iranian civilian airliner, killing all 290 people on board. The argument is that blaming Libya was just politically convenient, because at the time the US was trying to negotiate with Iran-backed groups for the release of Western hostages. And this leaves us with this strange dual legacy of the bombing. On the one hand, something good actually came out of it. The tragedy led to massive, life-saving reforms in aviation security, things like matching every bag to a passenger. But on the other hand, for Dr. Swire and so many of the families, there's this powerful, lingering feeling that justice was thrown out the window, that the truth was sacrificed for politics, letting the real masterminds get away with mass murder.
So where does that leave us? The case is officially still open. But for those who have spent decades of their life searching for real answers, the official story feels like a painful dead end. And so we are left with this. Despite a trial, despite a conviction, and despite decades of investigation, the real, definitive answer to who was truly behind the bombing of Pan Am 103, it remains agonizingly and maybe even permanently out of reach.